3 years ago, the name Cynthia Ramirez commanded reverence in the marbled halls of municipal power across the state. She was the architect of billion-dollar city bond packages, the quiet force behind major infrastructure contracts, and the senior partner at Commonwealth Strategies, a firm whose legacy was built on securing seamless, impenetrable public financing deals. She had a corner office on the 40th floor of the LA Financial District, views that stretched from the San Gabriel Mountains to the Pacific, and a professional reputation that suggested she could, single-handedly, balance the state budget. Her clients were the state's biggest public utility providers, powerful city councils, and the titans of defense and emergency services contracting. Cynthia, then 65, lived a life of precise calculations, where every risk was mitigated and every contingency planned. This was her world, a world of order that she had meticulously constructed over 4 decades. But order, she learned, is only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. For Cynthia, that link was her talented but deeply flawed nephew, Nicholas Young. Convinced he was smarter than the market and pressured by predatory figures, Nicholas had spent 18 months manipulating municipal bond funds, leveraging Commonwealth's sterling reputation to mask his own fraudulent schemes. When the SEC and FBI finally came calling, it was a sudden, violent earthquake. They raided the office on a brisk Wednesday in late November. Cynthia was on a call discussing a complex water treatment bond issue when agents in dark suits swept past the reception desk like a silent, unstoppable tide. Nicholas's actions, a massive scheme involving the misappropriation of approximately $1 million in funds designated for public infrastructure, didn't just bankrupt the firm, they shattered Cynthia's name. The media, hungry for a villain, plastered her image everywhere. Public finance guru's firm implodes in bond scandal. The fact that she was the primary victim, a woman whose entire net worth was wiped out by the ensuing lawsuits, was lost in the spectacle. Her professional licenses were revoked, her savings were seized, and by the following spring she was left with a meager $320 in her checking account and a cramped, windowless apartment in a neighborhood where the sound of the subway rattling past her window was the only constant rhythm. It was out of sheer necessity that she found the daily grind, a tired, perpetually underlit diner nestled between a pawn shop and a laundromat. The vinyl on the booths had been cracked and repaired so many times it resembled a patchwork quilt, and the scent of burnt coffee and old fryer oil clung to everything. But the owner, Manny, a good-hearted man who rarely looked beyond the stain on his apron, didn't ask for references. He only cared that Cynthia, despite her expensive past, moved quickly and kept the coffee coming. The job was brutal, a relentless, non-stop flow of customers who treated her less like a person and more like an extension of the automatic beverage machine. Yet, serving the early morning commuters and the tired night shift workers was honest work, and it gave Cynthia a strange sense of cleansing. The tips, inconsistent as they were, covered the rent and her expensive medication. Her life had been reduced to the simple physics of balancing a tray and timing a coffee refill, a stark contrast to balancing the complex financial ledgers of a major metropolitan area. The conflict arrived on a Tuesday morning, a day marked by an irritating, persistent drizzle that matched the diner's mood. The breakfast rush was tapering off when Thomas Rodriguez, CEO of Stone Innovations, walked in. Stone Innovations was a firm that specialized in high-tech urban fire safety systems, smart monitoring, advanced sensors, next-gen suppression equipment. Thomas, known by the media as the Fire Chief CEO, due to his previous career and industry focus, moved with the entitled swagger of a man who was accustomed to immediate deference. He was in his mid-50s, impeccably dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that seemed out of place among the truckers and office clerks. He settled into booth 4, immediately pulling out a sheaf of papers and launching into a loud, aggressive conference call on speakerphone. He was clearly discussing a massive, high-stakes municipal contract bid, a multi-year project for a major West Coast city. His volume carried across the small, quiet diner. "Excuse me, sir," Cynthia said, approaching his table with the firm, almost regal posture she'd instinctively adopted to deal with difficult customers. "I'm going to have to ask you to either lower your voice or take your call outside. Our other customers are trying to eat." Thomas paused his tirade just long enough to lift his pale blue eyes and look at her. His gaze didn't hold recognition, only dismissal. He saw a grey-haired woman in a cheap, too-large apron, an object, not an obstacle. "Just a moment," he barked into the phone, then turned to Cynthia, a patronizing smile twisting his lips. "I'll have the black coffee and, if you happen to know what you're doing, the special omelette. Do you understand this conversation is about a contract worth more than you'll see in your entire lifetime?" The diner went silent. The crackling sounds from the grill and the rhythmic churn of the espresso machine seemed to fade away. Cynthia felt the familiar hot rush of humiliation, but this time it was tempered by something sharper, professional outrage. She looked down, not at his face but at the papers he'd spread across the laminated tabletop, a habit from her former life. They were a mess of documents, acquisition proposals, bond structures, and most crucially, the underlying financial projections for the massive contract he was trying to secure. Her trained eye instantly locked onto the numbers. The leverage was absurdly high. The liquidity schedule for the first 18 months was non-existent. The penalty clauses were a liability minefield. It was quite simply an impending catastrophe disguised as a lucrative deal. Cynthia set the coffee down, her hand steady, and then looked directly at Thomas. Her voice, though low, carried the cold authority that had once silenced boardrooms. "Actually, sir, I understand you are talking about a contract that is about to destroy your entire company." Thomas froze mid-sip. "I beg your pardon," he managed, the insult momentarily forgotten. Cynthia leaned slightly closer, speaking only loud enough for him and a few stunned patrons to hear. "Those projections are flawed. Your contract structure is fundamentally unstable, relying too heavily on future municipal bond issuances that are predicated on optimistic tax forecasts. And from what I can see right here," she tapped a finger near a particularly alarming figure on a cash flow projection, "you'll lose the entire city contract, face regulatory investigation, and be dealing with a catastrophic public finance nightmare in 10 months. Thomas stared, his expression cycling from disbelief to sputtering anger. "Are you out of your mind? I don't recall asking for public finance advice from the waitress." The insult landed, sharp and clean, eliciting a nervous chuckle from a nearby table. Cynthia, however, felt the shame evaporate, replaced by a cold, hard sense of professional certainty. "You're right. You didn't ask," she replied, picking up his used sugar packet wrapper. "But if you had, I'd tell you to find a competent public finance consultant immediately before your ego drags your company, Stone Innovations, into insolvency. I've seen enough bad contracts to recognize the warning signs, even when they're scattered across a diner table." The arrogance on Thomas's face crumpled, replaced by a flicker of genuine alarm. He quickly gathered his papers and stormed out, leaving his unfinished omelette and coffee, and the specter of a 10-month collapse behind him. The silence Thomas Rodriguez left behind was heavy, thick with unresolved tension. Manny, the diner owner, approached Cynthia, his face a mixture of fear and admiration. "Cynthia, what in the world was that? That's Thomas Rodriguez. He spends more on lunch than I make in a week." Cynthia just wiped down the counter with methodical precision. "He was being loud, Manny, and he was arrogant." She didn't elaborate, but the brief encounter had resurrected a part of her she thought was permanently buried, the professional's pride in her own expertise. For the first time in 3 years, she hadn't felt like a disgraced former executive. She had felt like Cynthia Ramirez, the municipal finance strategist, and the feeling was electric, addictive. She assumed that was the end of it, a fleeting moment of rebellion against a representative of the world that had cast her out. But the next morning, the bell above the diner door jingled precisely at 5:45 a.m., 15 minutes before opening. It was Thomas Rodriguez. He looked markedly different. His bespoke suit was rumpled, his usually impeccable silver hair was slightly disheveled, and the confidence that had defined him yesterday was replaced by a taut, visible anxiety. He carried a heavy, beige accordion file clutched to his chest like a shield. Cynthia, already setting up the coffee service, simply nodded and unlocked the door. "We aren't open yet, Mr. Rodriguez," she said, her voice neutral. "I need to talk to you about what you said yesterday," he replied, his voice low and devoid of its usual bombast. "The 10 months, the insolvency." Cynthia poured him a black coffee out of habit, her eyes noting the dark, sleepless circles beneath his. She didn't invite him to sit, simply leaning against the counter waiting. Thomas slid into the same booth, the file hitting the laminated table with a soft thump. He spent 5 frantic minutes spreading documents out, Not the summarized projections she'd seen yesterday, but the full, terrifying raw data, balance sheets, capital expenditure forecasts, and proprietary bid analysis. "I spent all night going through my books," he confessed, his hands slightly trembling as he adjusted the papers. "I forced my CFO to pull records. And you were right, Ms. Ramirez. Not just about the leverage, but about the underlying structural flaw in the contract bid. My team didn't catch it. My fire safety expertise blinded me to the public financing realities." He swallowed hard. "My accountant says we have perhaps 6 months before we hit the wall, not 10. The contract defaults, the city sues, and Stone Innovations is gone." He looked up at her, his pale blue eyes desperate. "How did you see it so quickly? My own financial team missed it for weeks." "Your financial team is paid to tell you what you want to hear and manage your immediate cash flow, Mr. Rodriguez," Cynthia said, finally taking a seat opposite him with her own cup of coffee. "I was paid to spot catastrophic long-term risk. It's a different job entirely. I recognize patterns of risk that lead to public sector collapse, because that was my life's work." Thomas leaned across the table, his posture practically a plea. "I need your help, Cynthia. I don't know what it looks like or what your price is, but I need someone who can see through the performance reports and tell me if there's a way out of this firestorm." "I'm a waitress," she reminded him, the simple statement grounding the high-stakes drama unfolding in the dingy diner. "You're Cynthia Ramirez," he countered, his conviction suddenly ironclad. "You were one of the best public finance strategists in this entire region before your nephew's crimes. You were attacked, not found incompetent." It was the first time in years she had heard the distinction made by someone outside her legal counsel that the shame belonged to Nicholas, not to her expertise. A deep, dormant well of professional purpose stirred within her chest. "If I do this," Cynthia said, laying down the conditions, her mind already racing through solutions, "it has to be legal, ethical, and complete. I maintained my municipal securities principal certification and kept my LLC active after the dust settled, an old habit, never expecting to use them. I'd need complete, unrestricted access. Every contract, every bid, every historical funding document. No secrets. And I'd need the authority to make non-binding recommendations that you take seriously." Thomas nodded repeatedly, almost frantically. "Done, done, and done." "What about your fee?" Cynthia named a figure that was nearly 10 times what he probably paid his CFO, plus a demand for 25% equity in Stone Innovations if they successfully turned the company around. She wasn't just asking for money. She was demanding a stake in her own redemption. Thomas paused, calculating the enormous risk, the potential loss of control. Then, with the clarity of a drowning man grasping a lifeline, he agreed. "But," he added, "we position this as bringing in Ramirez Strategic Consultants, a high-level turnaround firm. My board does not need to know I found our savior in a diner. My reputation is already hanging by a thread." Cynthia gave a thin, knowing smile. "Fair enough. In the corporate world, weakness is a luxury few can afford. When do we start?" "Now," Thomas said, pulling out his phone. He immediately dialed his head of operations. "Get a complete financial package ready for Ramirez Strategic Consultants. Everything. Have it digitized and ready for secure review by noon." He hung up and offered Cynthia a tired, hopeful look. "Welcome back to the game, Cynthia Ramirez." She refilled his coffee cup, her hands steady, the smell of burnt coffee no longer a sign of her failure, but the scent of a new beginning. Thomas's office occupied the top 2 floors of the stone tower, offering a panoramic view of the vast city whose fire safety he was struggling to secure. When his assistant, a young man named Jason, who clearly regarded Cynthia with suspicion, handed her the files, she felt a powerful, familiar surge of energy. For the next 7 hours, locked in the executive conference room, Cynthia immersed herself in the wreckage of Stone Innovations. The company wasn't just in trouble, it was actively sabotaging itself. The massive municipal contract, the jewel in their crown, was the core problem. It was underpinned by an utterly reckless bet on aggressive performance bonds that Stone Innovations couldn't possibly meet without a capital injection they didn't have. But amidst the chaos, Cynthia found a glint of genuine value, a small, overlooked division dedicated to proprietary, AI-driven sensor technology. It was generating modest but consistent revenue, hidden beneath the flashier, doomed public sector bids Thomas had chased. When Thomas returned from his meetings, he found Cynthia not behind a desk, but at the whiteboard, where she had dissected his entire corporate structure using different colored markers. "How bad is it?" he asked, sinking into a chair. "Worse than you feared," she replied, facing him. "Your ego, Thomas, led you to chase the high-profile, politically motivated contracts, while you ignored the quiet, brilliant work your engineers were doing. The municipal contract is a dead weight, built on sand. We have to cut it loose." She laid out a surgical, three-step rescue plan: exit the catastrophic city bid, immediately divest 3 non-essential bleeding subsidiaries to generate emergency cash, and aggressively fund and market the overlooked AI sensor division. It was a plan that required immediate public failure, an admission that Thomas's biggest professional gamble had been a disaster. "The board will crucify me," Thomas said slowly, running a hand through his hair. "These were the projects I personally championed." "Then we give them the numbers," Cynthia corrected him, her voice firm. "Cold professional analysis, market data. This isn't about protecting your ego, Thomas. This is about saving your employees, your technology, and the company your previous life was built on." He finally agreed, a heavy sigh escaping him. She knew the hard part wasn't the numbers, it was the swallowing of pride, and Thomas, the celebrated fire chief CEO, was about to eat a very large serving of humble pie. The first true test came during the emergency board session 2 weeks later. Cynthia sat next to Thomas, a quiet but formidable presence. The chairman, a longtime rival of Thomas named Jeffrey Lewis, a man in his late 60s who smelled corporate blood, led the charge. "You're proposing we abandon the $750 million city contract?" Jeffrey thundered. "This reeks of panic and incompetence." "I am proposing we abandon a financially non-viable commitment before it leads to full corporate insolvency," Cynthia stated, her voice calm as she presented the irrefutable data on the performance bonds. "Mr. Rodriguez's leadership has the courage to recognize an error and pivot toward profitable, sustainable assets, specifically the sensor tech division." The vote was tense, split, but Cynthia's data-driven argument eventually won the day, 5-4. As the members filed out, Jeffrey lingered, his eyes dark with suspicion. "Bringing in outside consultants is the first sign of a sinking ship, Thomas," he hissed. "The investors are watching." Cynthia met his gaze, feeling the immediate surge of an old professional rivalry. They had saved the company from the numbers, but now they had to save it from the man. If you found yourself captivated by Cynthia's incredible return to power and her sharp analysis, you'll love the other stories of resilience and redemption on this channel. Hit that subscribe button now to make sure you don't miss any of our upcoming true-life dramas. Tell me in the comments below, if you were Thomas, would you have swallowed your pride and trusted the waitress who insulted your business, or would you have fired her on the spot? Over the next month, Cynthia executed the turnaround with the ruthless precision of a surgeon. The underperforming subsidiaries were divested, the debt was aggressively restructured, and the sensor tech division received a massive capital injection. Stone Innovations started to stabilize, the bleeding stopped. But Jeffrey Lewis's opposition intensified. He questioned every expenditure, demanded emergency reports, and openly campaigned among the board for Thomas's immediate removal, arguing that the need for an external consultant proved a fundamental failure of leadership. "He's not just trying to replace you," Cynthia told Thomas late one evening, reviewing Jeffrey's suspiciously timed aggressive communications. "He's running the classic corporate coup playbook I've seen time and again. Create chaos, undermine the CEO, and then swoop in to take over the distressed asset at a bargain basement price." The emotional deepening of their partnership was unexpected. Thomas, the arrogant CEO, had revealed his core motivation. His wife and young son had been killed 14 years ago in a catastrophic industrial fire, a tragedy that had pushed him out of the fire department and into founding Stone Innovations. It was his desperate, almost suicidal need to honor their memory by building a lasting legacy that had driven him to take the reckless risks. "This company is all I have left of their memory, Cynthia. The legacy is the only thing that justifies the loss," he confessed. Cynthia, whose own loss was tied to a betrayal by her flesh and blood, understood the profound, irrational power of that grief. They were two broken people, using logic and finance to stitch together the meaning of their lives. The moment of reckoning came on a rainy Thursday morning. Cynthia was in Thomas's office when Jason, the assistant, burst in, his face white. "Mr. Rodriguez, there are Homeland Security agents in the lobby. They're asking specifically for Ms. Ramirez." Cynthia's blood ran cold. After 3 years of relative peace, the specter of her past had returned. She walked into the reception area with Thomas, finding 2 stern-faced agents in dark jackets. "Ms. Ramirez," the lead agent said, "we need to discuss your involvement in an ongoing investigation regarding infrastructure security manipulation." Before panic could set in, the agent clarified, "Your nephew, Nicholas Young, has been cooperating with federal investigators. He provided information about a conspiracy involving multiple contractors who deliberately set out to destabilize public sector financing firms to acquire their client lists and secure massive under-the-table public contracts." Cynthia stood motionless as the agent continued. Nicholas hadn't just committed fraud. He had been recruited 3 years ago by a powerful contractor to destroy Commonwealth strategies so its assets could be acquired cheaply. The scheme was not random. It was a targeted act of corporate warfare designed to eliminate competition. Thomas's face went slack with shock. "Are you saying Cynthia was targeted? That my company is being targeted now?" The agent nodded. The architect of the conspiracy, the agent revealed, was Jeffrey Lewis, Thomas's own board chairman, who specialized in acquiring distressed assets. Jeffrey had used this method repeatedly and was now trying to leverage Stone Innovations' near collapse for his own hostile takeover. The agent produced a photograph. Jeffrey, sitting across a table from a young man Cynthia instantly recognized as Nicholas. "We need your help, Ms. Ramirez," the agent concluded. "We need you to attend the board meeting tomorrow and wear a wire. Jeffrey is making his final move, and we believe we can get him on conspiracy and fraud charges." The emergency board meeting the next day was packed. Cynthia sat, the wire a faint pressure against her ribcage, a strange fusion of her past and present roles. Jeffrey, smug and confident, began his prepared speech demanding a vote for Thomas's immediate removal due to gross incompetence and reckless use of external, unqualified consultants. "The numbers don't support your claims, Mr. Lewis," Cynthia interjected, standing slowly. "Stone Innovations is now structurally sound, exceeding projected recovery goals." "And who are you to assess this?" Jeffrey sneered, not recognizing the full gravity of the situation. "A discredited former executive. I am Cynthia Ramirez, the woman whose company you spent 3 years and millions of dollars to destroy," she stated, her voice steady and clear for the wire. "You orchestrated my nephew's fraud, Mr. Lewis. You're doing the same to Thomas now." Jeffrey's face crumbled, transitioning from shock to denial to a terrifying rage. He started sputtering accusations, confirming his knowledge of the scheme in his panicked defense. It was all the agents needed. The conference room doors opened, and federal agents flooded in. "Jeffrey Lewis," the lead agent announced, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, corporate espionage, and racketeering." In the chaos of the room, as Jeffrey was led away in handcuffs, Thomas and Cynthia stood by the massive windows overlooking the cityscape. The wire recording had captured everything. "What happens now?" Thomas asked quietly. "Now," Cynthia said, meeting his gaze, the past finally released from her shoulders, "we build." 6 months later, Stone Innovations was thriving, its sensor tech division leading the market. The massive insurance settlement from Jeffrey's crimes restored Cynthia's good name, and Ramirez's strategic consultants had a waiting list of clients seeking turnaround expertise. Cynthia, now 71, had found a new, stronger career, built on honesty and resilience. She had learned that the strongest foundations are often forged not in success, but in the white-hot heat of professional abandonment and the courage to rebuild. I'd love to hear from you. Which city are you watching this story from? And tell me, what is the single most important lesson you learned from Cynthia's journey?